Hey there! Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen leading the movement for movement and bringing you, yes, you, and whoever's in your background there. Another edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training where I take a strategy, concept, practice, exercise, piece of programming, philosophical musing that relates back to our fitness and adapted PE programming for the autism and neurodivergent population. And of course, answering your questions along the way. You can always leave those in the comments below. And while you're doing that, you can take a look at that link for the Autism Fitness Level 1 certification. And if you are ready to become an Autism Fitness Certified Pro, click the link, learn a little bit more. But now it is time to bring you this week's edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training. And what we're going to be talking about is the setup for each exercise. Now, the setup is critical because when anybody, our athletes, general population athletes, sports-specific athletes, anybody in a training situation is set up properly to complete that set of exercises, then you're going to have a better outcome. What do we mean by a better outcome? Better training effect, more focused, and of course, depending on the goal of that particular exercise, it's going to be better power output, a stronger push or pull or squat or carry, whatever it is. The setup is key, and oftentimes we have the inclination to rush through the setup portion so we can get to the exercise, or we want the athlete to be moving as quickly as possible. Not necessarily in the exercise, but as moving as quickly as possible from exercise to exercise, so we don't give enough attention to the setup. Now, when I talk about the setup, it's in addition to being the cognitive capability and the cognitive aspect of that, which I will cover. It's also the physiological, the actual physical setup of the athlete. So let's talk about it in the context of the PAC profile. That is the standard operating system of autism fitness training and programming. So we look at it through the vantage of physical, adaptive, and cognitive capabilities and those skill sets. So physically, in the setup, we want the athlete positionally ready to complete that particular exercise. So if it's a squat, we want, generally speaking, we want the feet slightly wider than shoulder width apart. We want that nice neutral spine position. In the Autism Fitness curriculum, we teach hands under chin and elbows down, which creates a nice framing effect and actually a little more stability around the trunk or around the core, or whatever we're calling it now. So it's a great position to set the athlete up in. And in the future, the advantage of having that triangular, I was going to say triangulated, but triangular position is that when the athlete is squatting below parallel and they've met standard for the exercise, we can start loading them up with a sandbell or a dumbbell or a kettlebell, and they're already in that position. They're already familiar with it. So we want the feet not only shoulder width apart, but we want them rooted. This is a big deal. We want the feet rooted and set into appropriate ground contact with the floor, because if the heels start coming up, this can actually inhibit the function of the posterior chain. It may not be by a lot, but it could be enough to offset the balance of that athlete when they're doing the squat, because we want the posterior chain, the hamstrings, the glutes, the low back, the mid back, the spinal erectors to be functioning as best it can, because that's going to govern how stable the athlete is during that squat position. So foot setup, hand position, shoulder position, all of these things we're mentally checking off when we're setting that athlete up to the point where they have a greater proprioceptive awareness of what the exercise should feel like, and we see them start to adjust, which is a big win for both the coach and the athlete. When you see your athlete starting to adjust themselves with positioning in a squat or a press or a row or a push-up, that means that they have a sense of what the exercise should feel like. So again, that is generally a sign of great improvement and much greater body awareness when performing that particular exercise. With exercises like our standing band or standing table rows, overhead presses, a great general rule is to have the athlete standing about shoulder width. That is going to most often provide the ground stability that they need. So even though we're talking about predominantly upper body exercises, we still want to look at what the feet, what the knees, what the hips are doing positionally. Are they stable? Are they staying in one place while the athlete is executing that particular movement? Now, one thing that we note about this is many of our athletes on the autism spectrum have a tendency to either rock forward and back or side to side when directly before or while they're performing that particular exercise. And when that is occurring, what we don't want to do is call attention to it and say, hey, stop rocking, or hey, keep your feet on the floor, or add some negative connotation to it. But we do want to catch the points at which the athlete is making great ground contact or rooting and point that out and say, oh, great feet on the floor, fantastic position, and guide the athlete towards greater awareness of where their body positioning is, because they may not necessarily be aware, as many neurotypical individuals are, of their positioning and how it influences the overall function of the exercise or performance of the exercise. So let's get into adaptive. We want our athletes as calm and focused as possible before they are performing an exercise. And this is another thing that I call a small thing that is actually a big deal. We don't want to rush the athlete to perform the exercise. So sometimes if that athlete needs a little extra time to self-regulate or needs a little extra time to engage in some type of low-grade physical stereotypy, or it needs a little bit of breathing room before they're ready to go, we give the athlete that room, that space, to either calm themselves or get ready or focus, because guaranteed taking those few extra seconds, even if it's climbing up to 10, 15, 20 seconds, and getting them back to the exercise focused and motivated and ready to go, is going to lead to a much better outcome in the performance of that exercise than trying to get the athlete go, okay, come on, you only have 5 seconds left. When we're doing a countdown or something like that, it usually just serves to elevate the anxiety and frustration of the athlete. So when we're getting over like the 20 or 30 second mark for the athlete to self-regulate, maybe we want to build in some considerations around that and start to reduce that total amount of time that the athlete is not performing the exercise. But if that athlete needs a few seconds to, again, self-regulate and get themselves ready for that exercise, especially if it's on a break period, absolutely let them have it, because we want the athlete set up properly physically. We want the athlete set up properly adaptively and have the focus and motivation to perform every set to the best of their current ability. And finally, we get to the cognitive setup. So expectation management is one of the biggest components of successful coaching. We want the athlete to understand what the expectation of performing the exercise is. And a lot of this also comes down to the amount of motor control that the athlete has during that exercise, or the amount of motor control that they're utilizing during that exercise. One of the things that we point out that is most common in the performance of particularly the strength exercises for the autism and neurodivergent population is the tendency to go really fast, and for the tempo of the exercise, whether it's a push-up or an overhead press or a band row or a squat, the tempo to start breaking down, because the athlete is attempting to either complete the exercise as quickly as they possibly can so that they no longer have to be doing it, which could be a motivational issue. It can also be a cognitive or kinesthetic awareness issue as well. Where's the body in relation to space? How fast should they be going? Or even the awareness of how fast they're going. So we have two things going on here. We have the neurological, the understanding of what the expectation is for performing that exercise. And then we have the neuromuscular, the athlete's ability to control the speed and range of motion of that particular exercise. Now, the neuromuscular is much more difficult to figure out in terms of how much governance or control the athlete has over that movement pattern. But we do want to take measures, and we have strategies around this in our curriculum, to inform the athlete as much as possible about what the expectation for performing the exercise is. And what that means is, if the idea is for the athlete to have a slow, controlled movement pattern and they're going really quickly, maybe we want to introduce a mirror prompt to that and demonstrate the exercise, that overhead press, that band row, for the athlete so that they can see what the exercise is supposed to look like. Because what we don't want to do is start focusing on or relying on a lot of suppositions or assumptions about the athlete's understanding of that exercise, particularly for our athletes who are nonverbal or have an alternative communication strategy, because we can't necessarily hear it from them that they understand the instructions that we're giving or demonstrating. So we want to know as much as possible about the athlete's consideration or processing of the information that we're giving them. And the best way to do that in terms of exercise is pretty simple. Demonstrate the exercise for the athlete as often as you need to, and we want to give them feedback when they are performing the exercise to the best of their current ability. That doesn't necessarily mean that the exercise is going to be performed perfectly, especially if that athlete doesn't yet have that motor control to perform that exercise. But the way that we instruct and the way that we cue and the way that we support that athlete from a cognitive perspective in the language that we use, the language that we don't use, the way that we position ourselves, the way that we cue the athlete when they're performing the exercise, all these things are really big deals. And what it's going to yield when done correctly is an athlete who has a greater appreciation and understanding for each exercise, how it needs to be performed, and what's happening when they are doing it well. So these are all things that we want to build into our coaching process, whether they are verbal or whether they are verbal processes or verbal strategies, or more of positional strategies, how we orient ourselves, the feedback that we're giving, even facial gestures and facial cues as well. So setting up the athlete is really important, even in group or class situations, as much as we can do to get the athlete into a good starting position for each exercise, so we can have them in the, let's get fancy, appropriate biomechanical readiness position to perform the athlete safely and effectively, because that's really what we're after, because that is going to get us and get the athlete the greatest possible training effect. So looking at it through the lens of physical, adaptive, and cognitive, again, the PAC profile, there are things that we want to see the athlete doing in preparation to perform that particular exercise. And each exercise is going to be a little bit different, but we want the feet rooted, we want the hips stable, we want the trunk in a good position, depending on what good position means for that particular exercise. And we want the athlete in that ready state in order to perform each exercise as best as they possibly can right now. And of course, there are going to be many times in which we also have to provide additional structure and additional support for that athlete if they are not able to perfectly execute that exercise just yet. Happens often, so we need to have successful strategies in mind in order to meet the athlete where they're at right now. So that is the setup for our autism and neurodivergent athletes. I hope this has been helpful for you. I'd love to know how it influences your program, so definitely leave that in the comments below. Would love to see it. And if you have any topics that you'd like me to cover in a future edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, leave those in the comments below as well. If you're ready to become an Autism Fitness Certified Pro, head on over to autismfitness.com. You can learn all about the curriculum. I'm Eric Chessen, founder of Autism Fitness, leading the movement for movement. And this has been another edition of Tuesday Training. I hope it has been helpful for you, and I will be back next time with another video.